Paul, segment 4, where things have gone wrong. I'm quoting you again. Paul Rahe, author of Soft Despotism, quote, "If the United States has gradually succumbed to what Tocqueville called soft despotism, it is arguably because we have abandoned the advantages that we possessed in Tocqueville's day." Close quote. So each of the 4 shields against the servile temptation that you described in the past segment has become weakened. Some remain intact. Explain what has happened here.
Okay, let me start with local self-government, since he does.
All right. Tocqueville does.
Yes. In the 19th century, the first thing that happens is the states begin to encroach in a serious way on the townships. And that means that power, influence, and importance flow to state capitals away from local government. Now, this is significant, but it's not overwhelming. In the late 19th century...
Does that take architectural expression? There's so many state capitals, particularly east of the Mississippi, that are gigantic, magnificent structures.
That's right.
Right.
And that growth in their significance is part of the story.
All right.
The second stage is the coming of the progressives. As an intellectual movement, it begins in the 1870s and the 1880s in American universities. The model is the German university. The inspiration is Hegel's phenomenology of right. It means moving away from the idea of individual rights towards a notion of a collective good that is represented by the civil service, who are to be trained at the University of Wisconsin and the University of Michigan and Johns Hopkins University and so forth. This becomes a force in the 20th century. It begins with Woodrow Wilson in 1912 and the beginning of rational administration and the experimentation during World War I with that. It becomes very big with the New Deal and much larger with the Great Society and the follow-up by Nixon. The consequence is local government and even state government is subsumed under national government. And the way it works is the national government provides grants. And those grants are conditional upon the state government, the local government, the city council, the school board, meeting all sorts of mandates that are laid down as a condition for receiving this money. And it extends into the private realm as well. My favorite example is the Buckley Amendment, authored by James Buckley, senator from New York, a libertarian. Even libertarians are busybodies, is the point that I like to make. He apparently was unhappy when he was in college because the school sent his grades home to his parents. And so he inserted in an educational bill a rule that if you took one dime of money from the federal government through student loans or the Veterans Administration, the GI Bill, or something along those lines, you had to honor the privacy of 18-year-olds and not communicate with their parents concerning their well-being. I was once teaching at the University of Tulsa, and I had a freshman honors course, and I had a student show up the first day, and then he showed up a month later. I thought he'd dropped, but apparently he hadn't dropped. And I called the dean's office, and I said, something's wrong. They looked into it. They found that he was living in a fraternity surrounded by whiskey bottles. He'd become a binge alcoholic. Legally, they couldn't call his parents because of the meddling Senator Buckley. I teach at Hillsdale College. We don't take that money, and we communicate with parents. Now, look, my simple point is this. Prior to the Buckley Amendments, colleges had an element of autonomy, self-governance, discretion, deciding what was morally right and what was morally wrong themselves, that was taken away from them by the Buckley Amendment. What allowed that to happen was the power that the federal government exercises over any institution that it gives money to. So the consequence is if you were on a school board...
Pause on your example for a second, though. It was taken away from them by the Buckley Amendment pursuant to their own inability to resist the government handout.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this, in other words, what I want to get back to is, you described in the previous segment an America in which people would easily have resisted government handouts, would have been puzzled by the notion that the government owed them anything at all. And now we're talking about an America in which the government handout is taken as a matter of course.
Yes.
What happened?
Well, in the 150 years between these two events, you get the New Deal, you get the Great Society, and you get the Nixon administration. That's part of the story. Another part of the story
and Americans
is
the Americans whom Tocqueville saw in the first half of the 19th century being trained, implicitly trained in civic agency, are now being trained by their own polity in dependence.
Yes.
All right.
Aid to Dependent Children does this, or did it, really on a massive scale. So it's very hard to turn that money down. In other words, the human beings are a fierce lot, and they can stand up to anything but temptation. And the trouble is that the temptations have grown. In my view, the great turning point is 1913, when the 16th and the 17th Amendments are passed. The 16th Amendment legalizes the income tax.
Right.
And that allows the federal government to have almost unlimited funds. The only limits on the funds it gets are really what we make, but what it's willing to take. The 17th Amendment decouples the federal government from the state governments, provides for direct election of senators rather than their choice by legislatures. When senators are chosen by state houses and state senates, the practical effect is they are beholden to their constituents. They are not going to run roughshod over those same state houses and state senates. And what that meant was that the state governments have a kind of leverage within the federal government that protects state prerogatives and allows federalism to live on and on and on.